In this part of the lesson, we're going to learn how to use the end property to move around within different regions of data in a worksheet. I'll start by opening up the file that I've already downloaded and extracted, and when you open that file, you'll find a set of league tables for the 2017-2018 NFL season. We're going to use the end property to move around within these different tables of data in the worksheet, and we'll start by looking at how we can get from the top to the bottom of the AFC East table. So let's start by heading into the Developer tab and opening the Visual Basic Editor. And then within there, let's insert a new module. And in the new module, we'll create a new subroutine called Find Bottom. The first instruction we'll write is going to select cell A4, which is just the cell that's at the top of the table that we want to find the end of. So we know how to select a single cell by cell reference. We've done that many times in previous lessons. So let's say range A4.select. From this cell, I'd now like to jump down to the bottom of the current table. So in our case, this is going to leave us in cell A9 eventually, which is the cell immediately above the next blank one in the list. To do that, I'm going to reference the active cell first, so active cell, and then I'm going to refer to the end property. The end property has four possible directions to go in: up, down, left, and right. To specify which direction to go, I need to open a set of parentheses and then choose the correct constant from the list that appears. The one that I want is actually just hidden underneath the tooltip, so if I use the arrow keys to scroll through the list, I'll find XL down is the first item in the list. I can enter that and then close the parentheses. Now the end property by itself doesn't perform any action, it doesn't physically move to a cell. The end property simply refers to the range at the end of the list in the direction you've specified. If I want to do anything to that range, then I need to apply a method or another property to it. So if I enter a full stop and then look for the select method and enter that, and that will leave us in cell A9 when we run the subroutine. So let's do that now. If I run the subroutine, I'll find if I switch back to Excel, we've ended up in cell A9. As well as using the end property to move within a populated list of data, you can also use the end property to leap over gaps. So if we use the end property and specified to move downwards again, we could jump over the two blank cells here and end up at the beginning of the AFC North table. So let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and rather than writing the instruction again, let's just copy and paste it, just to save a little bit of time. This time I'm going to run the subroutine step by step so we can see what each bit does. So I'm going to move my screen around a little bit so that I can see both Excel and the VB editor at the same time. And then I'm going to use the F8 key to execute these instructions one by one. So selecting cell A4 is no surprise there, that's the cell we end up selecting. And then the first index cell down, as we've seen, will move down to the bottom cell in the existing table. The next index cell down.select will jump to the start of the next table, which is cell A12 in our case. Something you'll commonly want to do in a worksheet is find the last populated cell in a column. This can be quite awkward to do moving downwards from the top of the list, particularly when the list contains gaps, as you don't necessarily know how many gaps you'll need to leap over. So instead of moving downwards from the top, what we can do instead is move from the bottom of the worksheet upwards. And we can use the end property to do that as well. Let's create a new subroutine called Moving On Up. And what we'll do to begin with is reference the last cell in column A on the current sheet. So we'll use the range property to do this, and I can refer to cell A, 1,048,576, which, as everyone knows, is the last cell in column A on a worksheet. What I could do then is I could select that cell, but it's not necessary to select a cell and then apply the end property to the active cell. We can shortcut this and just directly apply the end property to the range we've referenced. This time when I open the parentheses, I'm going to refer to the XL up constant rather than XL down, and then I can specify that I want to select that cell by applying the select method to it. So if I now run the subroutine, it doesn't matter if I step through it because there's only a single instruction, so I'll just run this subroutine and we'll find that we end up in cell A30. It's probably worthwhile mentioning quickly that the number of rows you expect on a worksheet depends on which version of Excel and which file type you're using. So 1,048,576 was the number of rows introduced in Excel 2007. Prior to that, in Excel 2003, using the XLS file type, the row number was only 65,536. So if you were to reference this range in a legacy workbook, for example, then this wouldn't work. So an alternative to referencing that range specifically is to use a combination of the cells property and the count of rows on the current sheet. So to achieve the exact same result here, I could say cells, and then for the row index, I could specify that I want to count the number of rows on the active sheet. So I can say active sheet dot rows dot count. I could then specify that the column index is just 1, so I want to do the same thing in column A, and then I can say dot end XL up. You'll notice we've lost the IntelliSense when we use the cells property rather than the range property. And then I can specify that I would like to select that cell. So if I were to comment out the first instruction, just to prove that this is the one that's going to achieve the result we want, let's select a different cell entirely in the worksheet. And then in the Visual Basic Editor, if I were to run this subroutine again by pressing F5, we'll end up in exactly the same cell. For the final example in this session, we're going to combine a sequence of end properties to get from the top left-hand corner of a table, cell A4, to the bottom right-hand corner by moving downwards and then to the right. You can combine as many end properties in a single instruction together as you like to move to exactly the location you need. So what we'll do for this particular example is create a new subroutine called find bottom right corner. So a new sub, find bottom, I'll spell that correctly, right corner. We'll begin again by selecting cell A4. As we've seen in the previous example, it's not actually necessary to select the cell you're starting from. We could just apply the end property directly to this, but it helps just to see the technique if I step through the procedure later on. What I'm then going to do is reference the active cell, which of course in that case will be cell A4, and then apply the first end property to move downwards. But this time I'm not going to apply the select method to the result of the end property. What I'm going to do instead is apply a subsequent end property and then look for the XL to right constant. I could then continue in this sequence. I could add another end property to move right again or down again or up or left, it doesn't really matter. But in this case what I'm going to do is apply the select method to the result. So if I were to use the F8 key to step through, you'll see, well, range A4 is already selected. And when I execute this instruction, we'll combine the down and the right in a single statement and end up in cell D9. Now you can either move on to the extra practice session at the bottom of this page to get some more experience using the end property, or you can move on to the next part of this lesson which talks about how to select an entire region of data rather than just a single cell.